The soils are very poor, very nutrient poor, so things like Drosera are ideally placed to, obviously they catch insects on the leaves, and you have many, many different species of Drosera all over the state. And this beautiful little plant, in one or two spots where you've got enough moisture, bizarrely enough, that was originally in the Oxalidaceae, and it evolved from a relative of the Oxalis into this incredible little pitcher plant, only found in southern Western Australia. More typical would be things like Xanthorrhoea. This is like the standard architectural plant that you find pretty much everywhere. Extremely fire resistant, those woody trunks, very thick, and you'll see plants of these sort of 5-6 meters tall that are hundreds of years old, that have weathered many, many fires. And when there is a burn, you tend to get following some pretty spectacular flowers. And you have similar species such as Kingia. You see here how the inflorescence is totally different. This is quite unrelated. It just looks very similar to the Xanthorrhoea, but again very fire resistant. And this is growing in the Stirling range. This is about the only part of Western Australia with any relief, any sort of mountains at all. They only barely creep above 3,000 feet. And I've often wondered to myself, just how many more species would you have in Western Australia if you had a couple of decent mountain ranges? 10,000 foot range here. I mean, what more would that generate? Now, Stirling Range is one of the real hotspots. You've got a couple of real hotspots there with at least 1,500 species each. And one's the Stirling Range and Fitzgerald River. The merest selection there, but just to give you some idea of just how colourful this flora is. And further north you have Mount Azure. All the plants there are different. Because we don't have the luxury of an east-west axis, like in the Med, the plants between the north and the south are completely different. These two areas are totally isolated from one another. Okay, now Australia is bewildering. And then there's always, one has got to go one better than everyone else. And the Cape Floral Kingdom, the Western Cape of South Africa is just amazing. Okay, you have even more species in Australia in this tiny, tiny area. And the reasons for that are, again, you've got this really poor soils for the most part. You have two oceans, the Atlantic and the Indian, two different directions of weather. You've got mountains that run along the coast in both directions, and the amount of different microclimates this generates, coupled with this very poor soils, which the mountaintops isolated from one another, you've just got intense speciation. It's also, like Australia, been incredibly stable. There's been no significant mountain building going on there, no glaciation, no volcanic eruptions, and it's had the whole of Africa behind it, giving it a rich array of pre-adaptive plants and pollinators. So it's no surprise that this small area holds the highest number of species we'll find in any mid-region. In some areas it's actually higher than rainforest, and it's that diverse in the Western Cape. Now, proteas, of course, are very much the equivalent of Banksias in South Africa. This Protea cynaroides is fairly unusual. This is one of the few species which will resprout. Many proteas, like Banksias, release seeds when the fires go through. And in South Africa's case, those seeds germinate and regrow, whereas the adult plants are killed for many of the species. This one manages to resprout. Other species do not, and you have a great variety of protea, just a few here. These are interesting because these are mammal pollinated. These are pollinated by Cape mice, and you find 2 or 3 species which look quite similar, growing very low to the ground. The other big genus, Leucodendron, is very common in the Western Cape, and then you have very showy stuff like Leucospermums. I see those growing in gardens around San Francisco as well, and these very showy plants. But the picture on the left was dramatically different. When I returned to it a couple of months after I took this photograph, it completely burned. This entire display wiped out. And fire in South Africa is more important than in any of the other regions, typically every 8 to 20 years, depending on the area of flame loss. And so the plants here are very well adapted to regenerating after fire, and there's a lot of fire-dependent species. Now, a good example of that is my Metis authentotticus. I have to brag slightly, I'm probably only one of 50 people who's ever seen that in the wild. It's found on just a couple of mountain tops, very hard to get access to. Extraordinary plant. And these are one of the many species in South Africa and Australia and other parts of the world, but especially here, that exhibit myrmecochory, which is they utilise ants to carry the seeds away and take them below ground because they have a nice fleshy part of the seed the ants want to feed on. And what this does is secure the seeds safely underground. When a fire comes through, it'll kill all the adult plants, and it will stimulate the germination of the seeds underground, and they'll repopulate. And some species of Mymetes are thought to be extinct for years, until fires of the right intensity went through, and seeds that had remained dormant for decades germinated and repopulated. You've probably got around 1,200 species that use myrmecochory in South Africa. Now, on the same mountains I saw the Mymetes there, you have things like this beautiful Erica tome, which is also endemic to that mountain. And Erica are staggering in South Africa. 660 species of one genus in the Western Cape. It's mind-blowing. And species such as Erica atribinosa are found on just one or two slopes in one mountain. And you have this sort of real localization of species throughout the Western Cape. And a tremendous variety of form and colour. Compare that with the Med Basin, where you've got, I don't know, maybe 10 species, and they're all pink and all remarkably similar. There's not much variety. Not much variety of pollinator. But here, of course, you've got bird pollination and a whole range of different insects to pollinate Ericas. The Fabaceae are totally different to you'd see anywhere else as well. Very, very diverse, very important, as they are in all of the mid regions. 5 out of 1,000 species there. And again, we have Drosera's. The soils are very poor, things like Drosera thrive. But look how different the leaf forms are. You don't have these lovely climbing ones as you had in Western Australia. They're very, very different. And you have things like Drosera cistiflora, which I've always thought was another really strangely named plant. I don't know how many South African botanists are familiar with cistus. This is the cistus flower, Drosera. Well, it seems to me more appropriate to use a name from the region than to choose something that grows thousands of miles away. But you do get a lot of examples of northern-centric plant naming. Now, orchids are almost as diverse here as in Western Australia. You've got maybe 275 species in the Cape, totally different to anything you find in all the other regions. The main genus is Dysa. They differ from other orchids in that the spur originates on the median sepal rather than on the lip. And you have a tremendous variety of colour. You also have very specialised adaptations. Dysa fasciata will only appear after fire. And Dysa flexuosa flowers better after fire. The other two will flower at any time. Dysa bivalvata, also fire dependent. And the interesting flower here is Dysa forficera. This strange little thing, not the most showy. This was the first one that had flowered for 60 years, and I just happened to be in the area when this flowered. What was remarkable wasn't the fact that this was the first one to sing, but there were wasps attending this flower, and it hadn't been there for 60 years apparently. But it was probably pumping out a lot of pheromones and still able to draw in pollinators despite such a long absence. But that's the showgirl really. Dysa uniflora, I think, is the most remarkable orchid probably to occur in any mid-climate region. Quite common in places on Table Mountain. Very, very showy orchid that manages to exist in one of these nice little microclimates that retains moisture throughout the summer. Now bulbs, of course, South Africa is legendary for bulbs, and there are, I think, around 2,000 species. It's something ridiculous like that. Incredible diversity. And you have things like Morea, which we also saw in the Mid Basin here. a couple of examples, and things like Babiana, which is another bird-pollinated plant. The birds will settle on this stem that sticks up above the flower and then poke their beaks down into these nectar-rich red flowers. Some are also fire-dependent. You see things like this Glycyrrhiza here, thriving after a very recent burn. Gladiolus, another genus in common with the Mediterranean basin, but boy, how have they speciated in South Africa. Hundreds of species, tremendous range of colour form. In the Med, they're all very similar looking and pink. But pollinators are so critical here. The red species, Cardinalis, grows on waterfalls, but it's not bird pollinated. This is pollinated by a butterfly. The pride of Table Mountain is a butterfly that specialises in red flowers. And you'll see it attending a lot of these flowers in around January, the Dicey uniflora, this, anything red, you'll find this butterfly around. You also have a lot of later flowering species, the autumn flowering ones. And there's a good number of plants which flower in the autumn in South Africa. Watsonias is another showy genus, and particularly I like this apocalyptic scene here with all the burnt out proteas which have just released their seeds, and these wonderful Watsonias coming through. And this fire dependence is so commonplace here. There's a plant that really takes it to the next level, I think. Things like Laconalia, they thrive, flower better after flower. This Hyabanthes is enjoying the extra nutrient and throwing up a good display, but it's not dependent on it. The Certanthus only appears exactly 2 weeks after a fire, and that's the only time it'll flower. It'll flower once, and then that's it, till the next time that bit of fangboss burns. And I was just incredibly lucky to have arrived in South Africa exactly 2 weeks after a fire and managed to find this incredible plant, which is pollinated by sunbirds. You can imagine if you're a bird, your entire fangboss has just been fried, and these things come up like a beacon. Yet another plant that responds well after fire is the Hemanthus, and there's many species of Hemanthus in the autumn, and also these incredible Brunsvigias, these massive sort of fibre optic bulbs that you see commonly down on the Cape and throughout the sort of coastal part of the Western Cape. And you have other species such as Brunsvigia radula, and this is one of the few areas of limestone in South Africa. This is quite a scarce rock in most other Med regions. In the Med Basin, there's heaps of limestone. In South Africa, very little. And this is very, very localised plant. Not far away from this, sort of, I don't know, about maybe 100 miles, I was finding this amazing crinum, which is a massive, tall amaryllis that flowers in the autumn. And these were pretty much in sight of one of my favourite plants in the whole of South Africa, which is the Aloe dichotoma, just an incredible forest of these things. But this pretty much signifies the end of the line. This is the Namib Desert, and this is the end of all the Mediterranean regions, really. But I mean, I couldn't resist going down. I couldn't resist including this incredible plant. But this is the end. This is the end of the Mediterranean climate regions, and I hope you can kind of appreciate now just how diverse this flora really is. I mean, I think it's one of the most remarkable you're going to find anywhere in the world. And I also think we're all incredibly lucky because we have the opportunity to go and see these things. And I would always encourage anyone to go and see as many of these regions as possible. So that's the Mediterranean climate. Thank you. Or at least it's 1% of the Mediterranean climate, because it's quite remarkable. I think it's interesting how different they are. You know, the same climate, and you've got 5 very, very different solutions. Anyway, thank you for enduring.
Well, are there questions?
When you're referring to autumn for South Africa, you're talking about their autumn or our autumn?
Their autumn. So that'll be from March, April, May. You get, yeah, so it's a complete reverse, yeah. And that's another interesting thing. You only really get a good display of as I always say, autumn flowers in South Africa and the Middle East. And it's very interesting how certain plants never seem to get going, they never seem to arrive to the different regions. I think that's a lot of the reason why you don't. Because the climate's the same. There's no reason why you shouldn't have. It couldn't grow elsewhere.
I've always wondered why so many of the same families predominate in all the three areas. They're so far apart. Do you really think that they really do have a common?
I think there's a tendency within them to be pre-adapted, to be able to adapt quickly, and I think others just don't have that. Whether it's tied to the leaves and the roots, you know, that's the key for these, especially the shrubs. The geophytes, of course, well, it makes sense. You're going to retreat underground during a period of drought. It's perfect. So they're ideal. But you find the same adaptations wherever you go. It's yeah. No. Pub then.
Well done.
Yeah.
Okay.
very
You're
nice.
welcome.
Yeah, thank you.